Hey there, it's Carly here from Tribe. So, day 88 of our 100 days of vulnerability. We're almost there. We've stalled a little bit the past few days, been a little bit kind of less diligent as we have been in the past. So, getting back in here. So, today I want to talk about, to me, a really kind of fundamental pair of kind of behavioral attributes, which I think kind of most of us fall into. I certainly fall into both of these things. I think they're just kind of part of growing up, really. And these two attributes are people-pleasing and defiance. And I think of these things as kind of like, they're like two sides of like a potential overbalance in different directions. So the people-pleasing direction is when I basically defer like what might be true for me in some way, like my needs and my desires, for another person, for what I think another person may be wanting or needing in preference of my own needs. I'm going to think of this as like, for me, like being a good boy. You know, I certainly spent a lot of time growing up learning how to be a really good boy. You know, like I would do the things that my teacher would ask me to do, and like do my homework and kind of follow the rules, you know, and doing these things was a way for essentially having some of my needs met, some of my belonging-based needs. You know, if I fit in and got approval for being the good boy, then there was like a certain kind of security I got out of that. I got to, you know, kind of be liked by authority figures and kind of fit in well with the system. You know, and I kind of got by for a long time by like being pretty good at kind of following rules and knowing like what kind of was expected of me, you know, and kind of not sticking out too strongly based on what I perceived those expectations were. And to me, this kind of people-pleasing good boy style behavior, it had me shape-shifting a lot. It would have me kind of like feeling into what any particular social context expected of me, you know, at least what I made up of what it expected of me, and shifting my way of being based on that social context. You know, so people-pleasing, being a good boy, it certainly I think is dependent on what the situation is. You know, like I think I applied those traits to like partying as I got older, you know, like learning how to fit into that kind of context and learn what the implicit rules were there, you know, like, okay, if I got drunk like everyone else, then I would, you know, be the good boy and be the liked person in this situation, because that was kind of the norms in this social group. You know, and it kind of had me like being really good at traversing different contexts, different social groups. I knew how to fit in pretty well, you know, and this is something that I actually quite value. You know, I think it's you know, there's a lot that I got out of that, kind of learning how to fit in with a particular kind of social context and system. But of course, like the big danger there is that I'm not actually really being true to who I am. Like some of the time, maybe that is kind of like an expression of who I am, but there's like, it's like so much of my attention is like outwards on what this situation is that, you know, I'm not kind of really connected into the deeper sense of who I am and kind of what my values are and what my sense of truth is. And from that place, then having a lot more solidity of like my shape, of like holding my shape, you know. So, you know, to me, this people-pleasing kind of characteristic behavior is like a, for me anyway, like had me shape-shifting a lot, right? So learning how to actually hold my shape, and maybe that shape not fully fitting in all the time, not like fitting in with this particular context and this you know, particular kind of set of social norms and the rules of whatever's going on. You know, if I'm holding my shape, sometimes that's going to create kind of abrasiveness, and it's going to, you know, mean that people don't like me and I don't kind of follow the rules, whether they're implicit or not, you know. So it's been a kind of a journey for me to learn how to hold my shape, and even to kind of know myself enough to kind of know what my shape is, in a sense, to be solid enough in what that is to hold. So that's kind of one side of this polarity, the people pleasing side. And the other side is this what I'm calling defiance. And to me, defiance is something which particularly comes online in our teenage years. So on one side, we've kind of got like the good boy or the good girl. The other side, we've kind of got the rebellious teenager, right? The defiant teenager, like, I'm going to do what I want. Like, don't tell me what to do. And I think most of us like go through that. It's pretty typical, right? Where we kind of start rebelling. And I think in different ways, it might be rebellion around like convention, like what's the kind of convention, my social group or whatever it is. I think for a lot of teenagers that might kind of come out as like how we look, it might be hairstyle or piercings or earrings or tattoos or whatever it is, like things that just like have me kind of changing, my expression so that I'm not just like following along with that kind of social convention. Or it could be a rebellion against authority. Like I might just like start kind of breaking the rules and not doing what my parents told me or my teachers or all these types of things. And for me, as a teenager, I up until probably year 10, I was like a very, very good student. And then in year 11 and 12, I changed schools, and I kind of like quite intentionally did this because I actually wanted to have like a clean slate where I could like express like a totally different version of myself, where I didn't have to always kind of, fit in with this kind of good student style character and shape that I'd made for myself. At this point I started like playing drums and, I started kind of splashing out a whole lot more and kind of, smoking cigarettes and weed and, drinking and just kind of, these kind of rebellious things of like doing the things that are kind of on the darker side of, supposedly what like a good person is meant to do, a good healthy person. And this was like a super, super important process for me, and I think it is generally for teenagers rebelling, it's like, it's a way of like stepping into territory of that I like hadn't been able to go into before, a way of like asserting independence and asserting and exploring identity and like, well, who am I? And actually I have the freedom to be able to do this. I can actually make my own choices, and being able to like explore that territory then is like such important data for then me knowing, actually what does feel good and not good to me. If I actually like step into that kind of territory that I was supposedly like wasn't allowed to go into, then I can actually make informed choices, I can make up my own mind. Now, of course, the thing with this defiance territory is that it's still actually, it's in opposition to something, right? I'm like, normally it's because I'm in opposition to a rule or a convention or a voice of authority. And as such, in a sense, I'm still like dependent on that thing. I still have a dependence on the authority or the custom, right? So it's like no less independent of people pleasing, maybe a tiny bit, like, because now I'm like able to do the other side. I'm able to actually say no, whereas before I was only ever able to say yes. So maybe there's a little bit more independence there. There's like the voice of no involved, but it's like, to start with, it's like a voice that is dependent on being in opposition to this thing, right? So now, like, I think of these two kind of polarities as like, they're kind of codependent polarities, right? I'm like actually dependent still on my relationships in some form, right? And the oppositional form of that dependency is just as dependent as the kind of the yes form of that dependency. And I think that's really important to be aware of, like if I'm rebelling against something, I'm still like defined by the thing that I'm rebelling against. And what I think becomes really dangerous there is that we think we've like asserted our voice of independence, but I think people can stay stuck there for their entire lives. It's like their kind of rebellion defines them, so much that now I'm just like constantly moving away from this thing. The other thing that I think is dangerous in the voice of defiance is that if I'm like, sometimes, you know, like social norms are there for good reason, you know, like kind of whatever it is, like binge drinking is not a very healthy thing to do, you know, like, hey, I don't mind like having a few drinks here and there, but if it becomes like it's an ongoing habit, you know, well, that's gonna fuck you up, right? So, you know, and this is where that kind of voice of defiance can just like actually become kind of really self-sabotaging, you know, and actually not really be serving of our best interests. You know, so I totally get stuck in these places, even, you know, having done a lot of work on me, on myself, and kind of seeing these things in myself, I still like can easily fall into people pleasing, you know, and kind of be blind to it, and I can still fall into being defiant as well. You know, particularly if I feel like somebody is like controlling me in some kind of way, like if I feel like, you know, somebody like, you know, wants me to be a particular way, you know, and I'm kind of, I can feel it, you know, or something like that, or at least I make up that I can, you know, that people kind of, you know, kind of putting these hooks into me or something like that. And then from this place, my voice of defiance can like really rear up. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, my kind of inner teenager can be like, I'm going to do whatever I want, right? So it's kind of like, you know, to me, it's territory that can be so easy to get caught into, particularly because I think there's also healthy versions of these things. You know, like I at times I do want to please the people around me. There's people that I really care for, and I want to do things for these people that you know, have them feel loved and kind of fit in with, you know, the rules of whatever has them feel that sense of being loved. You know, and so there is like a version of people pleasing that I want to engage with. I want to be consciously actually have a sense of intentionally, yes, I want to please you. I want to have you feel loved. And similarly, there's places where being able to speak like a voice of no, you know, like kind of a sense of healthy defiance. Like, you know, it's like, it feels good to me at times to like flex my no muscles in a sense, you know, like, you know, and sometimes even just because, you know, like at times I want to be able to say no, you know, like, no, I don't want to make you the cup of tea. I'm going to say no to that, you know, and so that I don't like, I'm kind of not falling into like the habit of like always saying yes to these things, you know, and you know, I don't think it like saying no just for the sake of saying no, I think can get dangerous, but sometimes it's like good to like, I think, you know, work out these other muscles of places that we maybe don't necessarily always go, you know, and then in that kind of the freedom of being able to do that, I have more choice basically, and I know that I can do that. Some of the time, certainly for me, I can get into like saying no just for the sake of saying no, and if it's certainly a place that I want to be careful of, you know, like, okay, there is a place of like flexing those muscles, but it can also be, it's almost like I can lose, like, why, you know, what's like the real reason underneath why I want to say no, you know, like, you know, am I, you know, like, take the cup of tea example, right? Like, you know, maybe I'm really engaged with something and I'm actually, just like really wanted to keep my attention here, and if I like disrupt that, I'm gonna like, you know, lose my flow, you know. And okay, well, saying no at that point in time, you know, it's like, actually no, I'm not gonna do that right now. I like want to stay with what I'm into, you know. Like, and this type of no, in a sense, has like a larger yes to it. You know, there's like something larger I'm saying yes to. I'm saying yes to me, like staying in flow. I want to stay in flow. You know, compared to like, I'm saying no just because I want to be able to say no. No, I'm not gonna do it, right? And kind of starts having like a, I don't know, like a bit more bratty teenager in it. So like, certainly for me, I think it's like a really important practice to like keep coming back to, well, hang on, what's the larger yes? Like, what am I really saying? What kind of, you know, yes to as part of my no, and why am I wanting to say no here? And where I can kind of get caught here is, you know, in kind of just expressing my right to say no versus actually there being a larger yes. And if these things are like, get conflated, it's like I can get in trouble. Like if I'm feeling defiant, like I'm being controlled and I just want to say no, but there is a larger yes in there as well, but it's like they've kind of become like, you know, overlaid somehow, you know, and then it can be like hard for me to, hear that larger yes, because like my teenager is like in that defiant energy, which is like just having me feel kind of sulky or something, you know, like I'm freaking don't want to do it, you know, like, and that can be like a bit of a hard place to me, like to come back into a more kind of internally oriented place of self-connection to it that I can like express more clearly from. So the last thing I want to say here, okay, so there's a kind of this polarity between people pleasing and being defiant, which is kind of to me this fundamental polarity of being codependent. So the final thing I want to say here is like what is it, and I've been speaking to this a bit along the way, what is it to do each of these things from a place of consciousness? So I'm being conscious about it, right? I'm like saying no because there's a larger yes. I'm doing people pleasing because I actually want to please somebody. They're important to me and I want to have them feel good. And being able to like be in that place of choice, of being conscious about it, to me ultimately comes down to our level of being connected to ourselves. It comes down to where we're like, you know, we're connected to what's important to us, and we've gone through the inquiry of like knowing what that is. You know, like, yes, this is a relationship that's important to me, and so I am going to put energy into it. I am going to care for this person and kind of have, you know, please them in whatever way that seems right. And actually, you know, this situation is important to me. Like I need some time to myself. I'm going to say no to spending time with you because actually spending time with myself, I know really resources me, and I need that time to actually create, you know, kind of more self-connection and more, you know, space of having been with myself such that I can like more easily be with you, you know, and so it's through that place of knowing who I am and having spent that time of checking in with myself and kind of, you know, exploring what my values are, that I can then have that freedom of choice around, you know, how I play in this polarity of things. And a lot of these things I think reflection and introspection is like really important, but also experimentation, you know, like I don't think it's really easy to know necessarily what, you know, is really important to us and what's most true for us without having tried things on. And then this is where, to me, being able to experiment, you know, with our yeses and nos, you know, and being able at times to say no just for the sake of being able to say it, you know, to see how you try it on and test out almost like what saying no like that, kind of what it's in service of or could be in service of, and what kind of consequences it has in our relationships, you know. And so I think there is a like an important place of trial and error of like figuring out who we are and knowing what our values are, and then it's through that process that we become essentially kind of responsible for ourselves. We become well differentiated. We have like an internal locus of control, an internal compass that lets us actually make decisions such that we're not dependent on our relationships in an external environment. So I hope this has been useful for you. I'm imagining that you can relate to this. I think most of us can relate to this. So I'm curious how you relate to the things that I've talked about, and if there's any of your own examples of people-pleasing and defiance that you'd like to share. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.